Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, December 9th. Hope everybody had a great weekend. It was a great weekend of sports as well, with massive news coming out of college football. The MLB, the NFL had some record-breaking performances as well. We'll talk about all of that and more coming up later on in our show. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, December 9th. But like I was saying, we're going to start off our show here today with a little bit of preview for tonight's action. The NFL has its final game of Week 14 kicking off in just a couple of minutes as the Dallas Cowboys take on the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a must-win game for both of these two teams as we take a look at where they are entering into the playoff race. The Bengals at 4-8 still technically have a shot if they win out. It's not an easy road for them. It's a very similar thing for the Cowboys. At 5-7, I would say they're the only team that has a shot at taking that 7 seed from the Commanders. Now, it's not an easy path. It's not something that I expect to happen, but this is a game that flat out both of these teams need to win if they want to keep any part of their playoff hopes alive. So let's take a look at what this matchup might entail. This matchup obviously is going to be very offense heavy. With the way that the Bengals have been playing offense, it's going to be a lot of points from their side. Both of these defenses are sitting in the bottom of the league. Both are bottom 10, nearing bottom 5 for both of them right now. The Bengals have an awful defense. We've seen it week in, week out, with Joe Burrow putting up MVP-type numbers and them sitting at just 4-8. It clearly is the defense's fault with a historically bad scoring defense on their side. Now, the Cowboys' defense has been improving a little bit with the re-additions of guys like Micah Parsons and some of their bigger stars. It still isn't enough. This is still a team that's letting the Giants hang in tough with them under the command of Drew Lock, and we saw how bad that was when they took on the Saints this week. Didn't really turn out too well for the Giants over there. So both of these defenses I expect to give up a lot of yards and a lot of points. They both suck, especially Dallas, against the run. So a guy like Chase Brown is someone that I'm highlighting to have a huge game tonight. He's someone that I think could get into the end zone a couple of times. We saw that with Joe Mixon when the Cowboys took on the Texans on Monday Night Football a couple weeks ago. I feel like something similar could happen tonight with Chase Brown. That's not to say that the wide receiver core of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins aren't going to have good games either. Like I said, I think this is going to be a shootout. And if you have any shares of either of these two offenses, it's going to be a fun night for you in fantasy as we head into the playoffs over there. As far as what it looks like on the Cowboys side of the ball, it's all going to depend on what kind of Cooper Rush we get. Are we going to get the Cooper Rush that we saw for the last couple of weeks when they took down the Commanders and they took down the Giants? Or are we going to see the Cooper Rush that we saw against the Texans, right? This is an offense that, again, really everything about this Cowboys team has been gradually improving over the last couple of weeks. We are getting a little bit more healthy. They get Jake Ferguson back tonight. That's going to be a huge addition for them after we saw Pat Freiermuth completely torch that defense over the middle. Look for a big day out of the Dallas tight ends, whether that be Schoonmaker or Ferguson tonight. CeeDee Lamb, healthy. They get Brandon Cooks back for the second game. They're basically at a pseudo bye week after playing on Thanksgiving. This is going to be a good game. I'm a little concerned about the Cincinnati kicking game. That's something that I'm a little worried about as they are calling up Cade York, who was kicking for Cleveland last season. He got cut. He's bounced around the NFL a little bit. They obviously don't have their star kicker, Evan McPherson, who hadn't been having the greatest season of his anyway. But that's the kind of guy that you'd like in a shootout kind of game. You'd like his leg to be over there because he has a cannon attached to his right leg down there. But Cade York, still a capable kicker. We've seen him step up in big moments when the Browns needed him to early last season. Obviously, on the waivers here, we'll see how that affects them. This is going to be, again, a shootout of a game. I'm looking at almost 80 total points scored in this one. We saw a game like that between the Rams and the Bills earlier this weekend. That was an incredible game. I'm not sure it's going to be as back and forth as that one, but I do think that we're going to get a lot of points on both sides. I think ultimately the Cincinnati offense powered by Joe Burrow is just going to be a little bit too much for Cooper Rush and that Dallas offense to keep up with. Because of that, I'm taking the Cincinnati Bengals to win this game 41-34. But let me know what you think. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we jump into the biggest news of the weekend. Juan Soto signed with the New York Mets. A massive deal. Not just a huge deal, the biggest deal in the history of sports. We'll talk about that, what it means for baseball, what it means for Soto, what it means for the Mets, coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I'll make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't replaced all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, December 9th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the Monday Night Football game. Kicks off in just about 5 minutes. In this segment, we get into some of the biggest deals, some of the biggest news in the history of sports, as Juan Soto has signed the largest contract, the richest contract, not just in the history of baseball, not just in the history of the Mets, but in the history of all sports. We'll talk about that in just a second, but before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, December 9th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some baseball news. It's been a while. The winter meetings are just starting up, and we saw some massive deals happen this weekend. Not to be forgotten, of course, Juan Soto, the big fish of free agency, one of the best free agents to ever hit the open market. He's had quite a journey to get here. He signs a 15-year, $765 million deal. That's the guaranteed. With incentives, it gets over $800 million. That is a ridiculous amount of money. You thought with Shohei Ohtani's $700 million, no one was going to touch that. In fact, when you take those two outliers out, the next closest contract in baseball is Mike Trout's at $426 million. There is no one in the realm of those two players, and we have seen back-to-back off seasons these records get shattered and broken by these generational players that are hitting the open market. Generally, you don't see that in baseball, but as these agents like Scott Boras decide that they want to set the record, get their notoriety back after what was a disastrous offseason for Scott Boras last year, they get the market, they get the big money, signs with the New York Mets, and Cohen does what he promised he was going to do, right? When he bought the Mets, he said, I've got the money, I'm going to spend it. And he came in fast, paid a lot of guys. It did not work out. Now he just simply outbids everyone. The Yankees went in there and they bid $5 million less, $760 million. And in the grand scheme of things, when you're talking about $760 to $765 million, that's not going to make much of a difference. Both of those contracts, unlike the contract that was given to Shohei Ohtani, has no deferred money in this, which means this is just straight up on the books, $51 million a year for the next 15 years for Juan Soto. Neither was the Yankees contract, so it's not like they were pushing it back, making sure he has to wait 10 years to collect $600 million or something like that. He gets it all just like a normal salary. That is crazy. He clearly just said, I want the most money. If he wanted to stay with the Yankees, he would have stayed with the Yankees. And that sometimes is how it goes. This is a guy that at just 20 years old won a World Series with the Washington Nationals. He was then offered $440 million, which at the time would have been the biggest contract in the history of baseball. He says no, ultimately gets traded to the Padres. Doesn't work out over there, then gets traded to the Yankees, makes it to a World Series. We all know what happens then, hits the open market. This is a guy who's just 23 years old. He is yet to hit his prime, which is scary because he's already arguably in the Hall of Fame if he retired today. Not sure if he'd actually be there, but this is a guy that might be the best hitter on the planet. I know you have Aaron Judge, who explodes for everything he does whenever he touches a baseball, but Juan Soto, his approach, the way that he approaches his at-bats, the way that he's able to get on base, it's very Barry Bonds-esque, maybe the best hitter on the planet currently. This is a guy in Juan Soto that is absolutely worth that kind of money. And now you pair him up with Francisco Lindor, a guy who finished a close second in the NL MVP to Shohei Ohtani last year. He goes from behind, or in front of, I should say, Aaron Judge to hitting right next to Francisco Lindor. The difference between these two teams is the Mets have a lot more talent. They've got a much deeper roster than the Yankees did last season. And as you saw, that was something that really hurt the Yankees when they had to go up against the super team in the Dodgers. Now, they're not going to meet the Dodgers in the World Series. If they do end up meeting them, the Mets would have to take them on in the NL side of the bracket. Now, the Mets obviously have a history of pulling their own Mets stunts, right? Hasn't always been great, but Juan Soto signing the biggest contract in the history of sports is something that should absolutely help. It raises their odds to win the World Series to plus 800. They're not favorites. The Dodgers still exist, but they're up there in the top 5 now, and honestly, well-deserved. This is a team that really turned it on down the stretch. They were the hottest team in baseball for a good part of the season. They started off slow. They seemed like a team of destiny. They ran into some trouble in the playoffs, but ultimately, this is a team that's young. It's going to keep growing, and this is a Mets team that challenged the Dodgers a little bit in the NLCS there. So we'll see what ultimately ends up happening with the Mets. But to put his contract into some more context here for you, right? Juan Soto, the richest deal in all of sports. You take one of the big four American sports in the NHL, the National Hockey League. They have had 7 contracts in the history of their league be over $100 million in value. The combination of all 7 of those guys, all 7 of their contracts, the biggest contracts in the history of the NHL, combines to $752 million. He is making more than every single top contract in NHL history right now, just by himself. Baseball money is different. It always has been. Just for those top players, though. It's tough to get in there. It's all guaranteed. It's something special. This should be a lot of fun. It's yet another former Washington National that is now in playing for a different division, for a different divisional opponent. Obviously, he started his career over there, won a World Series with them in 2019. And as a Nats fan, I had deluded myself to thinking that he would somehow come back to the nation's capital. They ended up not even making an offer. A little bit angry about that, honestly, but not my point here. He's gonna kill it with the Mets. This is gonna be a super fun pairing with him and Lindor. I cannot wait to see what happens for the future of the Mets. Not just Juan Soto broke this weekend, but also we saw a shortstop in Willy Adames go and join the San Francisco Giants. Yet another one that is a team record for highest contract, $169 million going to Willy Adames over there. He is a guy that has hit over 30 home runs in 3 straight seasons, adding a lot of power to a Giants team that struggled with it last season. It's not an easy ballpark to hit him, but with his power, if he played every single game last season in Oracle Park, in San Francisco, in the Bay, he would have finished with 32 as opposed to 34 home runs. So he's got the power, he's got the pop to play there, he's got a big glove, and that is someone that I think is huge for the Giants to get. Pair him up with Matt Chapman on the right side of the infield over there. Should be a lot of fun to see. But let me know what you think. Was Juan Soto's contract worth it? What are you expecting as the winter meetings continue in baseball? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention to college football. The playoff committee has come out with the final bracket. We will talk about that and much more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, December 9th. If you're just tuning in, we just finished going over Juan Soto signing the richest contract in sports history. In this segment, we turn our attention to college football. The first ever 12-team college football playoff has been announced. We'll break down the bracket, who I have winning a couple of these matchups, and how we got here. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday, December 9th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some college football playoffs here. The 12-team playoff bracket is officially set. We had our first 4 seeds with the bye. Now, obviously, the 4 conference winners. Oregon, the number 1 overall seed, sitting with an undefeated record, the only one remaining in college football. They defended their crown, taking on Penn State in that Big Ten championship. Their first year in the Big Ten, they take care of business. The number 2 seed, also with a bye, that goes to Georgia. Georgia beats Texas for the second time, and really was an ugly game. They have their backup quarterback come in, plays really solid for them. That's where they get most of their offense out of. Carson Beck just was not effective against that Texas defense. The 3 seed goes to Boise State, a super high seed for a group of 5 team that probably doesn't deserve to be at 3, but we'll get into that in a second. And the final bye that goes to one of the conference winners, that will go to Arizona State, who's playing like maybe the best team in the country right now. The final conference winner out of the ACC is Clemson. They pulled off the upset. They get the 12 seed, no bye. But talking about this a little bit more before we get into the rest of the bracket, these are teams that are ranked 1, 2, 8, 9, and 12, or 15 in the case of Clemson, right? The issue that you have now 8 and 9 seeds, these teams that aren't at the top, aren't 1, 2, 3, 4, getting buys into the next round, is something that I think needs to be fixed, right? Boise State, undoubtedly, I think in my mind, deserves to be in the playoffs. They were the best group of 5 team. They arguably were better than some of the conference champions, and I think it's a good thing that the conference champions get in. But giving them that preferential treatment, and more importantly, I think, if we're just trying to do the most simplest fix, keep the bracket basically the same, it's not the biggest deal in the world if you want to give precedent to those conference champions. That's fine with me. I like that the conference championship matters. They should at a minimum reseed, because this is something that people have been talking about all season long. They were thinking that, hey, maybe that 5 seed would be the best place to be, because theoretically you'd play the weakest conference champion at 12, which you would think would be the group of 5. Then you would go and play the number 4 seed after that, instead of going and playing the 1. And people were saying, hey, that's an easy path. That's the easiest path, to taking on to the semifinals, right? And they're not exactly wrong. Right now, as we look at the bracket, 5-12 matchup that's going to be taking on the 1 seed Oregon. That 5-12 matchup that's going to be taking on the 4 seed Arizona State, that's going to be between Texas and Clemson. And those two teams, right away, are very similar in my mind when you take a look at that, at their resumes overall. They both have struggled against good teams. The only great team that Texas has played all season long is Georgia. They lost twice to Georgia, and they looked pretty bad in both of those games. That's by far their best opponent. You can point to a Texas A&M that finished the season unranked. None of their other wins even come close to a Texas A&M, which is their closest to a good win. Now you look at Clemson, who gets in after upsetting SMU in the conference championship game, right? They get that automatic bid, but they have the same problem. This is a team that had a very easy schedule. They took care of business, credit where credit is due. They took care of business against the teams that they're supposed to beat, right? But when it came to the top teams, the best teams that they played, yes, they just beat SMU, and that's a huge boost to their resume there, but they lost when they played Pitt. They beat Pitt, but they lost when they played Louisville. They lost when we played South Carolina. Those two teams are their best opponents, right? This is not a Clemson team that you look at and you're scared to play, really. They have been playing good football as of late, and I like the physicality, but these two teams are a lot closer than it seems, and I think it's going to come down to which one of them is able to step up against the team that is frankly deserving of being in the college football playoffs. I'm leaning towards Texas in this one because they've just looked a little bit better, a little bit more consistent. But if Quinn Ewers continues to not be able to deal with the pressure and the physicality that a team like Clemson can provide, kind of similar to Georgia, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. So this is not an easy matchup by any sense of the imagination. And whoever wins this one, also not going to be able to just cruise into the semifinals. They're taking on an Arizona State squad that's super talented right now. They're playing like one of the best teams in the country. That's not going to be an easy route to the semifinals either. But at the 3 seed spot, Boise State, and this is, again, what people were talking about, the 6-11 seeds in Penn State at 6 and SMU at 11, now are licking their chops. They're saying, oh, we only have to go through Boise State. That's not a team to be taking lightly. Their defense has been playing really good as of late, but you also see down the stretch, the offense is a little inconsistent. As good as Ashton Jeanty is, and as much as he is a Heisman contender, Heisman favorite, however you want to put it, This team is very one-dimensional when they're taking away that first read from Maddox Madsen, right? If Ashton Genty doesn't get himself going, if he isn't able to break those tackles and get downfield, this is an offense that has really shown no signs of life outside of their one big workhorse guy. And that's really concerning when you're going to go up against a team either in Penn State that's super physical or in SMU that can slow you down. They're probably not going to be as big of a threat for SMU, or SMU's not going to be as big of a threat for Boise State if it gets there. But Penn State, if they end up beating SMU in the first round, is going to be a huge problem for a team like Boise State because they have those big guys that can really just out physical that Boise State team. But talking about that 6-11 matchup, it's one of those interesting ones because on paper you look and you say this is probably in favor of Penn State. You look at the way that they were able to carve up that Oregon defense in the Big Ten title game. That's something that I was not expecting out of them. SMU's offense is talented. Their defense is pretty good, and they're playing really good football. But we saw what happens when they get out physical in the beginning, really the first 3 quarters of that ACC championship game against Clemson. They were not up to the task. But James Franklin has really not been able to show up for big games. That's been the biggest issue for Penn State. They're 3-19 in his tenure when they play AP top 10 opponents. SMU falls in that range right there. It's a little bit concerning. Do I think that SMU is going to win this game? Probably not. But I do definitely think they're going to be able to put up a bit of a fight. Something tells me that Penn State is going to struggle because, again, they have yet to show up in one of those big games. This is the time for James Franklin to show that that's just a narrative. It's not the truth about his team. He's got to show that he can get them ready for this game. Taking up against Boise, like I said, I think Boise beats, actually, SMU if they make it there. But Penn State, I think, just out-physicals Boise, and that is a pretty easy path to the semifinals. The 2 seed is going to be Georgia. Georgia's going to be a question mark, right? They played better football when they had their backup quarterback in the game. Carson Beck, when he went down after halftime, they were just really ineffective. They ended up winning in overtime after a couple of key drives led by the backup quarterback. They're going to face the winner of they're going to face the winner of Indiana and Notre Dame. That is an in-state rivalry that I actually am maybe the most excited to see. This game is going to be a lot of fun. You have the best run defense in college football in Indiana, a team that's only giving up 70 yards per game on the ground, taking on a Notre Dame team that's their identity. They run the ball. They're currently top 10 in the nation in rush yards per game, 224 yards per game, led by Jeremiah Love, their running back. Obviously, their quarterback transfer from Duke, Riley Leonard, is a run-first kind of guy. They can beat you through the air if you let them, but this is kind of a best-on-best kind of matchup. This is also an in-state rivalry, right? This is a rivalry that has been dormant for 33 years. They haven't played since 1991. The last time that Indiana won a game against Notre Dame was 1950. Now, Indiana's historically not been great at football. This is their best season in their history. Period. There's no questioning that. This is statistically their best season by wins, by losses. They're in the college football playoff. This is going to be a huge game. This is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a close one, but I think at the end of the day, Indiana will find a way to pull it out. I think they learned their lesson from that Ohio State game where they just got bullied. But that's going to be the key. If Notre Dame, their front four, can really get up on that offensive line for Indiana, they could cause a lot of havoc and not let Curtis Rourke get comfortable. I do think Indiana finds a way to pull this out, though. So setting up those next rounds, I think Georgia rolls over either of them, honestly. That bye is really going to help them. They get a little bit healthier. But we're setting up for Ohio State versus Texas or Arizona State. I'm leaning towards Texas in this one. And Georgia versus Penn State here, right? Penn State, again, not huge in those big game moments. I think Georgia takes advantage of that. They find a way with their playoff pedigree to get into the championship game. And Ohio State versus Texas should be a lot of fun. Again, I think Ohio State is very, very similar to that I think Ohio State's very similar to that Georgia team in the fact that they can just kind of out physical the opponent, this one being Texas, and I think it's going to go a very similar way. A sloppy game out of Quinn Ewers and Texas, and I think Ohio State makes the finals. And I think Ohio State just has the best roster on paper. When we take a look at how it stands, I think Ohio State is going to end up winning the college football playoffs. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the NFL. Some crazy records being broken yesterday. We'll talk about that and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Monday, December 9th. I hope everybody had a great weekend. In this segment, if you're just tuning in, we just finished talking about the college football playoff bracket. A huge, huge deal. The first one to come out, obviously, in this new college football playoff era. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NFL. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do either of those two, if you have a bar crazy weekend in the NFL. We saw a bunch of teams clinch the playoffs, including the Eagles clinching a playoff spot. They're currently the 2 seed in